Brandon raised the whiskey glass and threw the liquid toward Megan without hesitation, the sound of the glass hitting the table echoing like a gunshot. The liquid splashed onto her black blazer, running in shiny streaks down the expensive fabric. A heavy silence fell over Red Maple Bistro, the trendiest restaurant on Union Street in San Francisco. Conversations turned into inaudible whispers, silverware froze mid-air, and all eyes locked on the violent scene. Megan stood frozen, breathing rapidly, her face contorted in a mix of shock and shame, her trembling hands trying in vain to wipe her face with a napkin. Brandon, laughing under his breath like someone who thought he was untouchable, leaned forward and slammed his hand on her table. A waiter dropped a bottle of wine in the background, the sound of shattering glass blending with Megan's racing heartbeat. Brandon brought his face closer, feeling in total control, his hot and heavy breath invading her personal space. "What's wrong, gonna cry?" I expected a better show from such a stuck-up girl. Megan couldn't move. Panic swallowed her whole, like she was being dragged into the depths of a dark sea. She felt every stare piercing her skin. Every whisper sounded like a blade cutting through what little dignity she had left. The whiskey dripped down her neck, soaking the collar of her white blouse, staining the fabric. The cold of the liquid contrasted with the burning heat in her face, a fire of humiliation that scorched her from within. The closest patrons turned their eyes away, pretending not to see. A gray-haired woman at the next table shrank in her seat, nervously fumbling with her purse. A young man filming the scene discreetly lowered his phone, afraid to get involved. No one stood up. Megan felt a tightness in her chest so strong it nearly suffocated her. The once elegant and soft piano music had vanished. She was alone, frozen, clutching the napkin like it was an anchor. Brandon straightened up and theatrically turned the now empty glass upside down, letting a final drop fall onto her table. He laughed loudly, a cruel thunder shaking every corner of the restaurant. "Wow, pathetic. Who comes to dinner alone on a Saturday night? I bet even the DoorDash guy wouldn't give you attention." His laughter spread across the room, a bitter sound wrapping itself around chairs, wine glasses, and frozen faces. Megan bit her lip so hard she tasted the metallic tang of blood. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but her body wouldn't move. Her fingers clutched the napkin until her knuckles turned white. The waiter who had served her at the beginning of the evening stared at the floor, his face pale as paper, unable to act. A group of tourists at the entrance looked on in shock while a woman held her boyfriend's arm, whispering for him not to get involved. Megan's pulse pounded in her ears like a drum, muffling everything else. Her soaked blazer clung to her skin, the cold spreading through her torso, intensifying her discomfort. Brandon then shoved her chair with his foot, the wood creaking loudly, nearly toppling Megan. She clutched the table, unbalanced, as her tablet slipped and hit the floor with a dry thud. The sound seemed to shake the atmosphere even more, creating a suffocating void. Megan looked down at the cracked tablet screen, now reflecting her tear-streaked face, her hair damp with whiskey. Brandon raised his arms as if he were a stand-up comedian, asking for invisible applause. "I see that, folks, the princess crumbled. Somebody call her Uber Black already." A knot of pain twisted in Megan's chest. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe with her, a collective sigh of helplessness. Every second was a deep cut into her dignity. The air was thick, heavy, hard to swallow. Brandon began circling her table, grinning like a satisfied predator. With each step, Megan shrank further, her stomach turning, feeling like she might vomit right there. The manager, standing near the kitchen, held a napkin in his hand, hesitating. The waiters lined up behind him, eyes wide, waiting for some kind of action that never came. It was as if time had stopped, every second stretching out, cruel and endless. Megan stared at the floor, searching for a fixed point to keep from collapsing. Her heart beat so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. Brandon came close again, bending down so his face was level with hers. His breath reeked of alcohol, so strong Megan had to hold hers. He smiled, a venomous, arrogant expression. "You know what I love most? Watching girls like you thinking they're strong, then collapsing like paper dolls. Delicious." Her stomach turned to stone. A single tear escaped, betraying all the strength she was trying to hold on to. Brandon raised his hand as if to wipe her face, but instead, he just snapped his fingers near her cheek, taunting. Megan shut her eyes, her whole body tensing. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into that cold floor, to become invisible dust. The audience watched in silence, complicit in their inaction. Some held their phones, but no one filmed anymore. The fear was as strong as the shame. The air pulsed, tension hanging like electricity before a storm. Megan trembled, her heart threatening to burst through her chest. She slowly opened her eyes, staring at her trembling hand on the table, the drops of whiskey forming small, shimmering puddles. The sound of Brandon's footsteps moving away was the only thing registering in her mind. Each heartbeat was a cruel reminder of what had just happened. Brandon turned to the silent audience, raised his arms, and let out one final laugh. Loud, scandalous, sharp as a blade. The echo of that laugh seemed to last forever. Megan remained there, motionless, wrapped in a cocoon of shame and fear. Her hair stuck to her face, her gaze hollow. The world felt still, heavy, suffocating. Megan didn't know how much time had passed since Brandon laughed for the last time. Red Maple Bistro felt like a parallel universe where sound was muffled by an invisible veil of embarrassment. The soaked blazer weighed on her shoulders like a rusted suit of armor. Every movement seemed impossible. Every breath was a battle against the pressure crushing her chest. She looked at the restaurant's entrance, as distant as a lighthouse in thick fog. Her reflection in the cracked, smudged tablet screen looked like a stranger, pale, disfigured by emotional pain, dark strands of hair stuck to her cheek. The woman who had walked into that restaurant with confidence was gone. What remained now was a broken silhouette, isolated in a bubble of shame. Her mind replayed every word Brandon had spat, as if they were sharp knives being dragged slowly across her skin. The laughter, the averted eyes, the phones being put away, everything repeated in a torturous loop. Megan felt the muscles in her legs fail and had to grip the back of the chair to keep from collapsing. In the back, a group of friends stacked plates and glasses, pretending everything was normal. A blonde woman in a red dress peeked discreetly, wide-eyed, her nails digging into the rim of her wine glass. A man in a suit checked his watch impatiently, as if this moment were merely a delay to his next appointment. To Megan, each of them was complicit, not for acting, but for not acting. She remembered a night in Brooklyn, walking alone after a meeting, almost missing the subway. Even alone then, she had felt strong, self-possessed. Now in San Francisco, surrounded by people, Megan had never felt so alone. The piano music had resumed timidly, sounding distant, almost ironic. The soft notes mocked the silent pain consuming every cell of her body. The waiter who had once smiled politely now avoided her, eyes fixed on his shoes, hands clasped behind his back. The manager, still frozen in place, held a cloth as if it were an anchor, waiting for the right moment to move. But that moment never came. Megan began to feel a vibration in her blazer pocket, a message maybe, or a call. The muffled sound felt like it came from another planet. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the chair, throw the glass, knock over every plate. She wanted to turn that shame into fury, into fire, into something that made her feel real again. But her throat was a sealed tunnel, tightened by fear. Sweat trickled down between her shoulder blades, mixed with water and whiskey. At a nearby table, a teenage girl in a denim jacket watched with a mix of curiosity and horror. Her thin fingers clutched her phone to her chest like a protective charm. Her father whispered beside her, ordering her not to get involved. Megan noticed every movement, every expression, every micro-reaction. All of it burned into her memory like a slow, torturous film. Brandon paced in the background, now talking to a friend who had joined him. The friend laughed, patted Brandon on the back. Both looked like they had just come from a bar in Soma. To them, Megan was nothing but a free show, a victim on display to spice up their hollow evening. With every laugh, her spiral of pain sank deeper. The phone vibrated again. Megan nearly dropped it trying to pull it from her pocket, but didn't have the courage to answer. The name on the screen? Mom. The silent ring was a cruel reminder that there was a world out there, one that still believed in her strength. But in that moment, she was no one. Not a daughter, not a professional, not a woman. Just a frozen target. The youngest waitress, Naomi, looked at Megan and bit her lip, her eyes brimming with held-back tears. Megan met her gaze for a moment, silently begging for help, but Naomi turned away, hurrying toward the bar. It felt like a door slamming shut in the face of someone already trapped in a dark room. The air in Red Maple Bistro felt heavier, harder to swallow. Megan felt every breath like a blade scraping down her throat. Her heartbeat grew stronger, her pulse pounding in her ears. Her head spun, vision blurring. For a moment she thought she might faint. Memories started to blend with reality. She saw flashes of childhood in Seattle, her mother's hugs on the porch, the smell of fresh coffee on rainy mornings. She remembered the day she landed her job at the design firm, the proud smile during the interview. All of it felt so far away now, so irrelevant. Brandon approached again. The sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor was a countdown to the next strike. He leaned on another table, picked up a napkin, and began mimicking a theatrical monologue. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's grand performance. A woman who thought she was strong but turns out to be just a broken doll. Applause. Some people laughed, but most remained expressionless, still unable to react. The sound of the fake clapping echoed in Megan's mind like thunder. The pain was so vivid it felt like it could be touched. She felt her face throb. Every second there was a scratch on her soul, a wound that wouldn't stop reopening. Shame spread like poison, seeping into her skin, her bones, her thoughts. Megan wanted to run, but she couldn't even lift her head. The cracked tablet on the floor reflected a Megan that no longer existed. The soaked blazer, the wet hair, the smudged lipstick. Every detail was a cruel reminder of her public defeat. Megan clutched the edge of the table so hard that her fingers went numb, her nails digging into the wood. Brandon, basking in his own delusions of superiority, raised a glass someone had left behind and toasted alone, like a king celebrating his victory from a throne of lies. Megan lowered her eyes, trying to find strength in some imaginary point on the table. There was nothing left but the sound of her own breathing, short and uneven, mixed with the soft creak of chairs nearby. The night that began as a simple outing to unwind after a long week had become a public hell, a cruel performance. Megan's throat felt raw. Her eyes blurred, her body shrinking in on itself as if trying to fit into an invisible box. When Brandon raised the borrowed glass once more to repeat his victory toast, the sound of firm footsteps broke through the suffocating silence. A chill ran across the tables. The manager of Red Maple Bistro, named Thomas, a tall man with a serious expression and piercing gaze, appeared among the tables, parting the waiters like someone clearing a path through a minefield. Thomas was known in the neighborhood for being discreet, always elegant, but at that moment, something in his eyes burned like embers. Thomas stopped one step away from Brandon, his blazer sharp, his golden name badge gleaming under the warm lights of the dining hall. He looked straight into the aggressor's eyes, unwavering, unblinking. The silence grew even heavier. The tables froze. Brandon tried to maintain his superior posture, but his smile faltered, twitching at the corner of his lips. Thomas didn't speak at first. His gaze was a razor blade slicing Brandon's bravado into invisible pieces. With a controlled movement, he took the napkin from Brandon's hand and dropped it on the empty table beside them. The sharp thud sounded like a gong, marking the beginning of something irreversible. Brandon cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Well, the head waiter finally shows up. Gonna offer me more ice or maybe a coffee, champ? The mocking tone came out weak, a cheap imitation of the Brandon from minutes before. The whole restaurant seemed to lean toward Thomas, waiting. He took a deep breath, adjusted his blazer cuff, and then spoke, his voice deep and sharp as steel. Sir, we do not tolerate abuse here. Not against customers, not against staff, not against anyone. The words vibrated in the air like thunder. A waiter at the far end of the room let out a relieved sigh. Another discreetly wiped his eyes. Thomas stepped forward. Now so close Brandon had to lean back, startled. Thomas's face was calm, so calm it was unsettling. I will ask you for the last time to leave our restaurant immediately. You are not welcome here. The nearest table trembled. The woman in the red dress held her breath. The teenage girl in the denim jacket clutched her phone to her chest as if bracing for a movie's final scene. Brandon looked around, searching for support that no longer existed. The friend who had laughed with him earlier now stared at the floor, shrunk into his chair, shoulders hunched like a rat caught in a trap. Brandon tried to laugh, but the sound came out strangled. Me? Leave? This is a public place. I can pay for whatever I want. Who do you think you are? Thomas didn't flinch at the defiant tone. He turned his head slightly, signaling subtly to one of the security guards at the entrance. Two tall men in black uniforms appeared instantly, marching like silent shadows. The impact was immediate. Brandon stepped back twice, bumping into a chair, nearly falling. The glass slipped from his hand, rolled across the table, then hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The crack of glass was like a trumpet of justice. All eyes turned to Brandon, now stripped of power, his face red, hands trembling, gaze lost. The figure that had ruled the dining room moments earlier now looked like a frightened boy caught red-handed. Thomas didn't need to say another word. The security guards approached. One gently took Brandon's arm, guiding him like a burden. The aggressor tried to shake him off, but the invisible weight of shame was stronger than any push. The entire restaurant watched in near reverent silence, as if witnessing a purification ritual. Megan, still seated, watched wide-eyed. Her heart still pounded wildly, but now something was different. A small flame had sparked inside her chest. With each step Brandon took toward the door, something within her rose from the ashes. Timid, but steady, Brandon looked back, hoping to find a friendly face, a partner in crime, but there was no one. His friend, now pale, stayed glued to the back of his chair, unable to move. The surrounding tables, once neutral, now turned their gazes toward Megan, as if awakening from a collective trance. As Brandon crossed the doorway, gently pushed by the guards, a woman muttered a soft, "Serves him right." A man in the corner clapped, tentatively but sincerely. One by one, the customers began to applaud too, a gentle rhythm gaining strength, transforming the heavy air into something almost solemn. Thomas stood in place, still serious. When the sound of applause filled the entire room, he turned slowly toward Megan. His gaze was steady, but now softened, almost paternal. He gestured briefly to a waiter. Naomi appeared running, holding a clean towel and a glass of fresh water. Thomas bent down and picked up the broken tablet from the floor carefully, as if it were sacred. He handed it to Megan calmly, keeping his gaze locked with hers. Megan took the tablet, her fingers still trembling, but managed to nod in gratitude. A thick tear fell, but it was no longer one of shame. It was a breath of relief, a sliver of reclaimed dignity. Naomi placed the towel over Megan's shoulders, holding it gently, her eyes brimming with emotion. Megan closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the fabric, the human touch that had felt so distant just minutes before. The sound of applause continued, echoing like a silent chorus of solidarity. Thomas then stepped back, took a deep breath, and turned toward the dining hall, raising his hands to calm the clapping. Collective breath returned to normal. Plates began to shift. Chairs creaked. But now everything felt different. The energy had changed. Outside, Brandon stumbled along the sidewalk, the cold night now his only audience. The distant sound of honking on Union Street echoed like the city's laughter. Karma had arrived swiftly, mercilessly, like an unexpected storm on a sunny afternoon. Outside the Red Maple Bistro, Brandon stumbled on the sidewalk, his Italian shoes slipping in the puddles formed by San Francisco's night fog. He looked around, searching for a familiar face, some kind of support to validate the arrogant version of himself he had created. But all he found were the red and blue lights reflected in storefronts, distant horns, and the indifferent shadows of hurried pedestrians. The security guard stopped a few steps away, ensuring he wouldn't return. One of them crossed his arms, eyes steady, expression neutral, like a human wall. Brandon opened his mouth to say something, but the words died in his throat. The cold air burned his lungs, his face flushed, not from alcohol, but from the raw humiliation that had finally caught up to him. Inside the restaurant, Thomas approached Megan again while Naomi gently finished cleaning her blazer. Megan held the tablet as if it were a lifeline. With every heartbeat, a warm wave of shame was slowly being replaced by something different, a silent courage rising from deep within. Thomas knelt again, his voice low but firm. "You're safe now. He won't be coming back." Megan lifted her gaze. For a moment she hesitated to believe him, as if expecting it to be another emotional trap. But Thomas's eyes didn't waver. There was no sarcasm, no hidden motive, only respect and genuine protection. A waitress brought a fresh glass of water, replacing the one that had gone warm. Megan held it carefully, her fingers still trembling. She took a sip, the cold liquid running down her throat, washing away a bit of the pain that felt lodged there. At that same table where Brandon had delivered his grotesque performance, there now hovered a nearly sacred silence. Customers slowly resumed their conversations, but in hushed tones, as if speaking in a church. Some glanced discreetly in her direction, guilt in their eyes for having done nothing before, but also admiration for her resilience. Outside, Brandon sat on the curb, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The cruel laughter that had fueled him minutes earlier now echoed only in his mind, transformed into voices of accusation. A car passed slowly. A couple glanced at him with curiosity, then moved on. The entire city seemed to ignore him now, reducing him to a drunken blur on a cold night. Thomas called over 2 waiters, instructing them to carefully collect the shards of glass. With each piece discarded, it felt like a piece of the dark night was being cleared away. Naomi brought a light blanket, offering it to Megan with a timid smile. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the soft warmth wrap around her, as if she were slowly returning to her own body. The applause had ceased, but the energy of support still lingered in the air, almost tangible. Megan realized that, even in silence, the gazes were different now. Some of solidarity, others of remorse, but all confirming something she hadn't expected to feel again: respect. After organizing the team, Thomas turned to the dining room. "You can carry on, folks. Tonight we showed that everyone has a voice here. Everyone deserves respect." His words echoed, gentle yet strong enough to resonate in every corner of the restaurant. A warm tear rolled down Megan's face, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She let it run down to her chin and fall onto her lap. It was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a mark of liberation. Outside, Brandon lifted his head, looking into the restaurant through the window. The fogged glass reflected a man he barely recognized. The jokes, the confident smile, the arrogance, all gone. His face now marked by cold, eyes red, chin trembling. Karma had arrived in its purest form, being forced to confront one's own misery while the world moved on, completely ignoring him. A taxi pulled up. The driver rolled down the window. "You getting in, or are you gonna freeze out here, buddy?" Brandon hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. He got in without a word. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, frowned slightly but chose not to ask questions. The taxi drove off, vanishing into the mist lit by street lamps, swallowed by the night. Back inside Red Maple Bistro, Thomas quietly asked for Megan's bill. She tried to protest, but he simply shook his head. "Tonight you owe nothing. Dinner is on us. Respect. You've paid in full." Naomi held Megan's arm, helping her to her feet. The first attempt was weak, but on the second she managed to stand. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe with her. Each step toward the exit was an invisible but profound victory. At the door, Thomas made way. Megan looked back for a moment, seeing the table where it all happened. Her blazer was still damp, but now it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like proof that she had endured. As she stepped outside, the cold wind hit her face, but instead of making her shiver, it felt invigorating. Each breath was a reminder that she was alive, that she had control over her own destiny. The city sounds slowly returned. The lights became sharper in shape and meaning. Thomas watched Megan walk down the sidewalk, head held high, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The San Francisco night, once oppressive, now seemed full of possibility. Outside the Red Maple Bistro, Brandon stumbled on the sidewalk, his Italian shoes slipping in the puddles formed by San Francisco's nighttime fog. He looked around, searching for a familiar face, some form of support that would confirm the arrogant version he had built of himself. But all he found were the red and blue lights reflected in shop windows, distant honking, and the indifferent shadows of hurried pedestrians. The security guard stopped a few paces behind him, ensuring he wouldn't return. One of them crossed his arms, eyes steady, expression neutral, like a human wall. Brandon opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. The cold air burned his lungs, and his face burned with a flush that came not from alcohol, but from the raw humiliation that had finally overtaken him. Inside the restaurant, Thomas approached Megan again while Naomi delicately finished cleaning her blazer. Megan held the tablet as if it were a life raft. With each heartbeat, a warm wave of shame was gradually being replaced by something else, a quiet courage rising from deep within. Thomas knelt again, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now. He won't be coming back." Megan looked up. For a moment she hesitated to believe him, as if expecting it to be another emotional trap. But Thomas's eyes didn't flinch. There was no sarcasm, no hidden agenda, only genuine respect and protection. A waitress brought a fresh glass of water, replacing the one that had gone lukewarm. Megan held the glass carefully, her fingers still shaking. She took a sip, the cold liquid washing away some of the pain that seemed lodged in her throat. At that same table where Brandon had put on his grotesque show, there now lingered an almost sacred silence. Conversation slowly resumed, but in hushed tones, like whispers in a chapel. Some customers glanced discreetly in her direction, eyes filled with guilt for having done nothing earlier, but also with admiration for her endurance. Outside, Brandon sat on the curb, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The cruel laughter that had fueled him minutes before now echoed only inside his mind, transformed into voices of accusation. A car drove by slowly. A couple looked at him with curiosity but kept going. The entire city seemed to ignore him, reducing him to a drunken shadow in the cold night. Thomas called over 2 waiters, instructing them to carefully collect the shards of broken glass. With each fragment thrown away, it felt as though a piece of the dark night was being swept out as well. Naomi returned with a light blanket, handing it to Megan with a shy smile. Megan took a deep breath, feeling the soft warmth wrap around her, like she was slowly returning to herself. The applause had ended, but the energy of support still hung in the air, nearly tangible. Megan realized that even in silence, the looks were now different, some filled with solidarity, others with remorse, but all of them confirming something she hadn't expected to feel: respect. After organizing the staff, Thomas turned to the dining room. "You may continue, everyone. Tonight we showed that here, everyone has a voice. Everyone deserves respect." His words echoed softly, yet with enough weight to resonate in every corner of the restaurant. Megan felt a warm tear fall, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She let it run down her chin and drop onto her lap. It was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a mark of liberation. Outside, Brandon lifted his head, gazing through the restaurant window. The fogged glass reflected a man he barely recognized. The jokes, the confident smile, the arrogance, all had vanished. His face was worn from the cold, eyes red, chin trembling. Karma had arrived in its purest form, being forced to confront his own misery while the world moved on, utterly indifferent. A taxi approached, the driver rolling down the window. "You getting in, or gonna freeze out here, buddy?" Brandon hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair and stood up slowly, legs unsteady. He got into the car without saying a word. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror, frowned but chose not to ask questions. The taxi drove off, vanishing into the streetlight-lit fog, swallowed by the night. Back inside the Red Maple Bistro, Thomas quietly asked for Megan's check. She tried to object, but he simply shook his head. "Tonight you owe nothing. Dinner is on us. As for respect, you've more than paid your share." Naomi held Megan's arm, helping her to her feet. The first attempt was shaky, but on the second she managed to stand. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe with her, each step toward the exit an invisible but profound victory. At the door, Thomas stepped aside. Megan looked back for a moment, seeing the table where it all began. Her blazer was still damp, but now it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like proof she had endured. As she crossed the threshold, the cold wind hit her face, but instead of making her shiver, it invigorated her. Every breath was a reminder that she was alive, that she was in control of her own path. The sounds of the city returned gradually. The lights gained sharper edges. Thomas watched as Megan walked down the sidewalk, head held high, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The San Francisco night, once oppressive, now seemed full of possibility. As she walked down Union Street, Megan felt the cold wind cutting across her cheeks. But for the first time that night, she didn't shrink from it. The thin blanket Naomi had placed over her shoulders felt heavier than it actually was, carrying not just warmth, but every look of support, every shy clap, every held-back tear from the restaurant. She stopped in front of a small bookstore's window, now closed. The interior lights illuminated colorful covers, bits of poetry taped to the glass, handwritten notes of all sizes. Megan leaned her forehead against the cold glass, closed her eyes, and let her breathing slow. For the first time in hours, she didn't have to worry about every stare, every word, every step. In that suspended moment, she allowed herself to simply exist. Images from the night came back like painful flashes. The cold liquid trickling down her blazer, the sound of the glass shattering, the laughter echoing like sharp blades. But alongside those memories came others, more recent, more powerful. Thomas standing like a wall, Naomi holding the towel, the growing applause. Each detail wove together into an invisible patchwork quilt, covering her wounds with a new layer of courage. Megan lifted her head, opened her eyes and stared at her reflection in the window. Her face was still marked, smudged lipstick, irritated skin, tired eyes. But there was something new there, a glimmer that hadn't existed when she walked into the Red Maple Bistro, a glimmer that silently said, "I survived." She took a small step back, adjusted the blanket on her shoulders and kept walking. With every step her muscles ached, as if she had run an emotional marathon. But with each breath, the weight of humiliation lessened, replaced by a quiet, undeniable strength. Megan made her way toward the bus stop. The city lights blinked like low-hanging stars, the rustle of leaves blending with the distant sound of sirens. For a few seconds she simply walked, listening to the rhythm of her own footsteps, feeling the cold air fill her lungs. At the stop, she sat on the metal bench, still holding the cracked tablet. She ran her fingers over the fractured screen, remembering how Thomas had handed it back, as if it were something precious. It was just an object, but in that moment, it symbolized her own integrity, cracked, but not broken. An older woman in a blue hat sat beside her, watching Megan with a kind but non-intrusive gaze. In silence, the woman reached into her purse, pulled out a small packet of tissues and offered it. Megan took it, murmuring a barely audible, "Thank you." The simple gesture warmed her chest, as if each small kindness stitched the invisible wounds left by cruel words. As the bus approached, Megan closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a silent prayer, not for strength, but for clarity. A prayer to remember who she was before the night began, to find the woman who was now being reborn, stronger than any previous version. When she stepped onto the bus, she felt the eyes on her, but this time, she didn't shrink. She walked to the back, sat by the window, adjusted the blanket and held the tablet in her lap. The city lights sped past outside, like scenes from a movie that was no longer about defeat, but about resilience. Megan leaned her head against the cold glass, watching her reflection. She smiled, a small, almost secret smile, but real. Every heartbeat seemed to repeat the same phrase, echoing through every cell, "I am more than what happened to me." She remembered afternoons in Seattle, when her mother encouraged her to never bow your head to those who try to erase you. She also remembered her first job, the times she failed, and kept going, more determined. All those memories were no longer distant fragments but essential pieces of who she was. As the bus climbed a gentle hill, Megan decided right then that she would not let this night define her. Brandon might have tried to destroy her confidence, but all he did was expose the strength that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of fear and silence. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket. Megan pulled it out and read her mother's message. "Let me know when you get home. I love you." Her chest warmed. She replied simply, "Almost home. I love you too." And this time she didn't fight the tears. She let them fall, silent, washing away the last of the pain. When the bus stopped near her apartment, Megan stood up and nodded a firm thank you to the driver. She stepped out onto the still cold sidewalk, but now each step carried a new weight, as if every inch of ground was a victory. As she opened the building door, the familiar hallway smell greeted her, along with the distant sound of a neighbor watching TV. She climbed the stairs slowly, gripping the handrail tightly. At her apartment door, she took a deep breath, turned the key, and stepped inside. The quiet space welcomed her like an old embrace. She set the tablet on the table, took off her damp blazer, and sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. There, alone, Megan realized she no longer had to fight to prove who she was. She had already proven it, to herself. Every breath was a declaration of freedom. Every heartbeat was a silent promise that she would never again let herself be reduced to silence. She didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she would face it with her head held high. Because that night, at the Red Maple Bistro, something inside her changed forever.